a lot, if not most, of the great works of art and music and literature have some kind of centering power around death. And I think that's because it's this kind of this end point of all of our existences.
Right.
And it's something that has a sense of significance, whether you're religious or not religious.
So excited to chat with you today. I am Mo Hickman. I'm a student here at Regent in the Master of Arts of Theological Studies program. I'm doing the Christianity, the Arts concentration. I love talking about the connection between art and theology and faith and personal growth and all these wonderful things, and I think you do too. So can you just share with us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
So, I'm Marie Clarkson. I am a research associate in theology and literature at King's College London. And I like to research the relationship between the arts, particularly the popular arts, and our spiritual formation. I also run a podcast called Speaking with Joy and write books and other stuff like that.
Yeah, just the little things. So, pop culture, what does that have to do with theology? Why should Christians care about pop culture?
Well, I think part of the reasons Christians should care about culture is that it is a part of the world that God is involved in and is always at work in, I believe. I don't think there's any corner of creation where God isn't working. And it's also something that plays a key role, I think, in kind of our own formation of self and our formation of our tastes and our desires and the things we enjoy in the world. And so I think it's worth thinking about seriously and thinking about theologically. I also think it's funny because there's this kind of canon of works of art that we tend to take seriously theologically. So whether that's things like Dostoevsky or, we take Bach seriously or we take Mozart seriously for some reason, or various things. But something I find fascinating is that a lot of those works of art and those works of literature were actually popular art back in the day. They were deemed kind of lowbrow, they were read by the masses. And so I kind of tend to think that a lot of what we think of as great art is only proven to be great art until afterwards. So I think it's worth paying attention to things now, thinking about how it's shaping us, what it tells us about the culture that we live in, and what it says about what human beings are thinking and longing for in our own day.
That is such a great point, and that what we consider to be kind of the highest art relics that we have were once the art of the people. And the same things. It reminds me of Shakespeare even. We would say the greatest playwright who was once just a commoner telling stories that sometimes weren't always so popular. But no, that's a great point. So then what are some of those popular culture things that you enjoy?
So, well, this one's, it's kind of cheesy. I might get some laughs.
Oh, please.
And also
I love laughter.
Controversial sometimes. But one of the things I wrote about was Harry Potter when I was doing my PhD.
Okay.
Because this is like one of the best-selling series of all time. But the thing I found really fascinating about it is that when you read it and when you really dwell on it, it's this long meditation on death, on what the death of other people does to us, on how to prepare for our own death. And it's also just a lot of fun. So that's one of the things I find compelling and fascinating when you think about popular culture and what it tells us about the world. And I think that a lot of people, you could see this in various complicated ways, found a lot of their sense of identity and their sense of what was good and bad and how to be a good person in the world based on series like that. And obviously that was big when I was younger, but there are other series and other forms of art. There's TV shows and even I think about like fandoms as such an interesting kind of phenomenon of how people are forming their sense of self. So those are kinds of things I like to think about.
Yeah, and you really are fascinated with death. You teach a whole class on the art of death. I had the pleasure of taking, learned so much. Can you just explain and share a little bit more about why does death capture your imagination? What have you learned about death? How does that shape how you live now?
Yeah.
Just the easy things.
It's funny, when I first started my job at King's, one of my colleagues, we sat down to lunch on the first day after a seminar, and she was like, "So why are you fascinated with death? Do you experience death at a young age?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Wow, it's nice to meet you too."
Right.
I don't really know how to explain why I'm interested in death. I think all of us are going to die.
It's true.
So there's an element of universality to it. I also think that a lot, if not most, of the great works of art and music and literature have some kind of centering power around death. And I think that's because it's this end point of all of our existences.
Right.
And it's something that has a sense of significance, whether you're religious or not religious. And so thinking about how art explores that and how we think about it seems really compelling to me. I also think I was interested in it from a formation standpoint because Christians believe that death is not the final thing.
It's
right?
true.
We believe
Yes.
that, in the words of the Creed, we believe in the resurrection of the body and the life
Yes.
of the world to come.
Life everlasting.
Indeed. But the problem with that, not the problem, but is experientially, we experience death as final, right? That's how I have experienced the death of people in my life.
Right.
That's what it seems to be from my own perspective. None of us have kind of peeked around the veil.
It's true.
And so one of the things I was interested in is how do we kind of rightly orient ourselves towards death in a posture of hope when we haven't experienced that resurrection directly? And so with art, I'm interested in how it kind of does two things. One is it helps us experientially plant ourselves in the narrative of the Christian story. So I think of that with something like medieval morality plays,
Yes.
where they help you kind of see yourself as a character entering into the tale of death and facing death in hope, with a good conscience, surrounded by either the virtues or, the saints. Or I think art can also just console us. It can
Yeah.
remind us of God's presence and goodness. And I think it's really fascinating to think about how music has done that and how people are drawn to music in these times of suffering and death because it gives them this sense of contact with the divine. So those are all kind of a swirling ocean of answers to your question.
Yeah, of
But those are
course.
some of the reasons I'm interested in death.
And very good reasons, I might add. Are there particular artworks that you would suggest to people wanting to kind of engage with the ideas of death?
So one that comes to my mind is the Ars Moriendi. That's kind of a good place to start. And that was this series of wood cuttings that were created during the plague. So during the plague, in some places up to 80% of the population died. And so the church felt like they needed resources because they had priests dying so quickly they couldn't attend to all the dying.
Yeah.
So they made these wood cuttings. There are all these images, and they're paired with kind of poetry and description of how to face death well. And so I think that's a good place to start. And the other one I would think about is Arvo Pärt's music, particularly
Yes.
Tabula Rasa, which we looked at in our class.
Yes. One of my
And-
favorite pieces of music still.
Yeah, and it's not actually a piece about death. But what's interesting is that it was, in many hospices, it's been chosen as the #1 piece for people to listen to as they're dying. And I just find that really fascinating because the composer really consciously creates it to be something that draws you out of the experience of time and into kind of God's time. And thinking about that as something we can experience in music is really beautiful and is something I'd point people to.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing those ideas. So art, it really does shape us. It helps us think about ourselves, think about our death. So from the Christian perspective, then how can art help our spiritual formation?
Well, I think in some ways I try to push back on kind of like an overfixation on art because I like art a lot because I'm a weird nerd. And I'm very particular, right? I like my poetry, I like my literature, I like my music. But I think that anything, when rightly engaged with, can become a part of shaping our imagination and shaping our spiritual life. But I think art is particularly powerful because it allows us to kind of attend to the world in different ways, right? So when I read particular books, there's this great line from Chesterton where he says, fairy stories tell you about rivers that run with wine and apple trees that have golden apples to refresh the wonderful moment when you encounter a real river and a real
Right.
apple tree.
Yeah.
And to me, that is one of the things that art can do, is it kind of gives us a palate cleanser, a window washing for our view of the world, and allows us to accept it in a posture where we think of it as a gift.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of our spiritual formation. So that's one thing art can do. It can also allow us to inhabit the story of Christianity and kind of hone our biblical imaginations.
Yeah.
Get better understanding ourselves in that story. And it can also do basic things like teach me, as it did for many centuries. It can help us meditate on scripture. It can help us learn about the viewpoint of other people. I think a great part of art is helping us develop empathy.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of things art can do.
Absolutely, it can. So you think about death, you've been thinking about art. What are some other things that you've been thinking about right now? What else are you working on?
Well, I just finished a book on metaphors. And for the non-literary nerds amongst us, that probably doesn't get your heart beating super fast.
I am a bit of a poet, so I'm like very excited about
Okay.
this.
So I guess the thought behind it came from kind of noticing that A, we use metaphors all the time.
We do.
And B, noticing that a lot of the metaphors we use in the modern world have to kind of do with machines and with money. So I started noticing that for myself. I noticed I would say I was processing something,
Yeah.
that I was recharging,
Yeah.
all these kinds of machine languages. And I started to reflect on the fact that metaphor for myself, it had a lot of resonances.
Yeah.
There is something like recharging that we do. But it also has this kind of merciless element, right? Because if I'm a machine and I'm processing, then if something difficult happens to me and I process it, then I should just be done.
Right.
When in real life, when something difficult happens to us, grief is this circle we go in over and over again. And having the wrong metaphor can actually make us regard ourselves in this kind of merciless way. So that was what got me interested. And then I started thinking more about the metaphors that Scripture gives us. So I wrote this book as kind of a meditation on 7 metaphors in Scripture.
Okay.
So it's things like people as trees that you get in
Yes.
Psalm 1, or wisdom as light. That was one that really got me when I was thinking about it. We describe a book as illuminating,
Yeah.
or saying someone's a very lucid thinker, or we describe being in the dark. And all of those are kind of this family of metaphors describing knowledge and wisdom as light and
Right.
ignorance as darkness. And so the book kind of meditates on these different metaphors in Scripture, and also meditates on the power of metaphor itself,
Right.
and what that does for us spiritually and theologically, and how it invites us to engage with the natural world. So one of the things I took from it was that looking at the natural world and paying attention to it discloses things about reality and helps us understand ourselves and God better. But also thinking about how theology is shaped by the metaphors we used, and being
Yeah.
careful about it. So I really enjoy getting to write about that, but thinking about that a lot.
Yeah. So it seems like you're taking these very like you said, machine type metaphors and kind of giving us a new script that is more like life-based, nature-based.
Well,
is that kind of the take, or?
I would say I'm not giving you a new script, I'm
Okay.
giving you an old script.
Even better.
Yes, no.
Reminding us of the script that we have.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to be like against machines and money. There's a reason we use those metaphors. They're
Yeah.
part of our daily experience. But I also want to kind of put those in conversation with, or even kind of expand the palette of colors that we're painting with when it comes to metaphors, and use those kind of more ancient metaphors as in some way more fundamental. They've lasted longer.
Right.
And kind of use them as tests for these new metaphors and see what lasts.
Yes, and is there a date? When does this book come out? When can we read about these metaphors?
I don't actually know.
Okay.
The manuscript's been accepted, so it's sometime next spring,
All
I
right,
think.
we will stay tuned.
Spring or summer. It's called You Are a Tree.
You Are a Tree. Very metaphoric title.
Thank you, I thought so.
Wonderful. So now this week you have been teaching a class here at Regent, something along the lines of re-enchantment in the world. Does that have anything to do with these metaphors? I think of machines being very disenchanted and life in trees being a bit more on the enchanted side. Does that kind of philosophy play into these stories?
Yeah, so it's interesting because enchantment has this very kind of specific and interesting arc in philosophy and theology. It kind of starts with Max Weber, where he talks about the disenchantment of the world is kind of happening around the Enlightenment. But one of the things that's interesting about that is that a part of disenchantment is a change in metaphors that we use for creation. So we go from thinking of creation as a book that speaks to us about God and declares something about the world as disclosive and communicating things about God's nature,
Right.
to thinking of nature as a tool or a machine, something we can use.
Right.
So one of the kind of characteristics of disenchantment is regarding the natural world as something we can exploit and use. So metaphors themselves kind of play into, or at least display, the kind of tensions between enchantment and disenchantment.
Yeah. And is re-enchantment something that we should desire to engage our world with? Is this a good thing?
That's actually something we really explored in the class, because I think one of the confusions about enchantment is people think they'll say we need to re-enchant the world. And one of the things I wanted to really kind of focus on is the world is what the world is.
Right.
It is either enchanted or it's disenchanted. Enchantment actually has to do with our own way of regarding the world. And so if anyone's going to be enchanted, it's re-enchanting ourselves.
Right.
Because I think that the whole idea of kind of re-enchanting the world actually has that same kind of manipulative impulse, you know,
Right, yeah.
of Bacon,
Yep.
wanting to use the world. So I think about regarding the world in a more enchanted way is how I think of it, rather than re-enchanting.
Right.
It's paying attention to the world and seeing it as it really is.
Yeah. So maybe to kind of bring this all full circle then, can we use contemporary art to view the world in a more enchanted way? Will that help us?
I tend to think so. I think that the way I think about it is that art can help us pay attention. So we've just been reading during the class this book called Clara and the Sun.
Okay.
And what's fascinating about it is it's narrated from the perspective of a robot. And kind of at the central question of the book is, what is it to be human? Because it's about this robot that's created to take care of lonely teenagers. It's kind of in a slightly dystopian world. And she has this relationship with the sun because she's solar powered, where she
Okay.
thinks of the sun as a character like God.
So she's really recharging.
Yeah, so she really is recharging with the sun. And one of the things I noticed after reading it, she writes, the character who narrates the story, she writes about the sun pouring forth his nourishment.
Yes, I feel that.
and the sun's kindness. And obviously, I don't worship the sun. But now, after reading that book, whenever I'm outside and I feel the sun, I have this kind of sense, I'm reminded of the book, and it makes me want to be thankful and to be open and to be conscious that actually I do need nourishment.
Of course.
And I receive it from God.
Yes.
And so I think that's an example of the way in which a work of literature can kind of help us pay attention to the world in a different way
Absolutely.
and see what's really there, but that we might have missed because of our own perspective.
so important. So important. I look forward to adding that to my reading list.
I think
Sounds
you'll
like a
enjoy
great
it.
tale. So now, when you step away from the desk and you put down the books, what are you doing for fun? What gives you joy, Joy?
You know, I really love cooking.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I've just come into a great amount of what I've been describing as culinary toys. So I'm looking
Ooh.
forward to getting back from Vancouver
Yeah.
and playing with all my culinary toys and having friends over and trying new recipes.
Oh, well, I look forward to seeing those pictures on your socials. Yeah, sounds like it will be a wonderful feast.
Yes.
Thank you, Joy, so much for chatting and for sharing about your work and for inspiring us. And I have a lot to think about. I look forward to seeing you around campus virtually and in person as you can continue to teach for us. And yeah, I look forward to having more of your wisdom and seeing more of the wonderful ideas that you put into our re-enchanting world.
Thank you so much, Mo. It's been a great conversation.